Welcome to the Potter Discussion.
Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Potter Discussion, discussing Harry Potter, Fantastic Beasts, and the Wizarding World fandom. I am your host, Oscar, and this is episode 128. Thank you for joining me today in this episode, and it is a good one. Because if you follow my Instagram, and if you heard the last episode, maybe even both, you will know what this episode is about. Obviously, you've seen the title, but I went to see The Cursed Child on Broadway in New York. It was fantastic. It absolutely blew it out of the park, which of course, I was going to say it blew it out of the water, and I was hit it out of the park, so I just went for blew it out of the park. Combining those two things, but I really enjoyed The Cursed Child on Broadway in New York, and today I will be doing an overall review of it. I know there's a lot of reviews coming at you, but this is definitely a must-do episode. Just so you don't have a solid block of series of Dumbledore's reviews, I'm just, sprinkling in some different stuff. But that's basically what this episode is going to be about. Some things that stood out to me about the play, some things that were what I thought they would be, some things that weren't, unexpected surprises, and just really what I thought of the whole experience. So that is what you will be getting in this episode. If you want some relevant images that are relating, obviously, to this episode, that is over on the Potter Discussion Instagram at ThePotterDiscussion over on Instagram. You just search that. And I made a video about it that you can watch, really kind of a whole summary of what happened, and also some beautiful images that I managed to capture of the Lyric Theater, which is where it was. The lobby was honestly I walked in and it was this huge arched ceilings, and some of those VR experiences around the halls. It was a really amazing space. And then I went into the actual theater, which was, you could fit a couple houses in there. I was reminded of the Great Hall, and the stage, oh man. I really cannot explain on an audio show, so make sure you go check those images out at the Potter Discussion over on Instagram. But without further ado, it was a great show, so let's get straight into this episode. Okay, so the way this is going to work is if you have seen the play, then you will be able to understand fully what I'm talking about. But even if you haven't, you will still have some idea of what I'm talking about, because I'm really just talking about more story and characters. So you will definitely catch on if you have no idea, just really no idea what I am, the words that are coming out of my mouth. But the first thing, let's just go. The first thing that I really want to talk about is Harry. So this takes place 19 years after the whole story, the main story of Harry Potter. It's that 19 years later scene where they're sending their kids off to Hogwarts at the end of Deathly Hallows Part 2. It's kind of that scene continued is The Cursed Child. It's Harry Potter as an adult. I think he's 32 maybe, and the rest of the trio are as well. And they have kids, and they're sending them to Hogwarts, and Draco's involved, and it's all this sort of stuff. But the one thing that stood out to me the most was Harry and his position with Ron and Hermione. In the story, Harry was kind of in the middle of Ron and Hermione, but he was also really far away, because Ron and Hermione always had this tension between them of they really were not compatible, but they were almost the most compatible with each other, because they really hated each other at some points. Like in the Prisoner of Azkaban, when Ron thought Crookshanks ate Scabbers, he did not speak to Hermione. Hermione was in tears because they weren't friends, and it was a whole experience. When they became friends again, it was the best thing in the world, and Harry really wanted that to happen. And I think what I was really noticing there is Ron and Hermione, I think, could have gone either, very, very bad friends or very, very good ones. And lucky for us, they became very, very good friends, even closer than friends. They got married. And what that led to me thinking is Harry is even more of a third wheel in the Prisoner of Azkaban, in the Cursed Child, because Ron and Hermione are married, and the whole different time situation. If the whole premise of the play is that Albus, Harry's kid, and Scorpius, Draco's kid, get a time turner, and they're trying to save Cedric. It's a very complicated time thing, but the whole thing works. I think Ron and Hermione are married. They're not married sometimes. They never were married in others. So it's a very confusing situation. But in the main timeline, Ron and Hermione are married, which I think is very important, because is Harry part of that at all? I mean, of course he was interacting, he was still with them, but I think Ron and Hermione definitely have a different bond, and their friendship has kind of evolved past just three buds, just like sitting on a wall after dark. But I think now it's much kind of deeper, because also they've known each other for much longer. In the first, in the third book, that was just their third year together, which is not a long time. I've known some of my friends for more than a decade, so it's definitely important that you that we saw that Harry was still with his friends, but I think it was much more different. I think with Ron I think is kind of turned into exactly what he was at school. He took over the joke shop, Weasley's Wizard Wheezes, and Hermione became the Minister of Magic, which now I realize is the correct term. But I think we could have predicted that. I mean, Hermione becoming the Minister of Magic absolutely fits, and Ron taking over the joke shop absolutely fits too. And Harry coming in Auror, I mean, is probably one that makes sense most of all. And the head of magical law enforcement, no less. So there's definitely, 100%. We can absolutely see how the trio's grown up to be what they did. And Ron has really become Fred and George. He is really taken up the mantle of jokester, of lighthearted person. And that does him well. Hermione has always loved that side of Ron, and it's apparent in the play. We see that they are on their good terms. They are always, really, really good friends with each other. I mean, honestly, friends is still an apt term to describe them, but they are married. But Ron and Hermione are still very much close. And I think it is much closer than they were, which is why I was thinking, is Harry pushed further on the outside, or is he still kind of where he was? And when the sense that I got was Harry is still where he was in terms of where, how they were friends in the Potter series, because they were still spending a lot of time together, and there were some scenes that was just Ron and Harry. There were some scenes that were just Hermione and Harry, things that were separate and all that stuff. There was a lot of people that did not spend time with each other that were like Ron and Hermione, who were not 100% together all the time. And I think that is why they managed to stay married, because they function at very different frequencies, and that was still very apparent in the play. Which makes sense, because even at school, Hermione would always be working, she would always be getting fantastic grades, she'd be reading, she'd be interested, and Ron was just kind of being lounging, not really doing anything, and Harry would be trying to be Hermione, but really kind of failing, and really being more of a Ron, if that makes any sense. It definitely makes sense. This timeline does make sense, and the future is exactly what we could have planned, and I think, although Harry is not in their close relationship, obviously, I think he is still part of their lives, and still a very large part of how the story turns out. Alright, so we've established Harry as still part of the story, but now let's talk about who was still at least a little bit like their character, who was not really changed, who was not really different and completely in a different headspace, I guess you could call it. Who was really like that? The first person that came to mind was Moaning Myrtle. Oh boy, that scene was so good. I can even begin to describe how good that scene was. I'm sure there's a link on YouTube. I'll throw some links in the show notes that are, just some good scenes that are on the Cursed Child YouTube page. So if you want to go check that out, those links are in the show notes. But the Moaning Myrtle scene I thought was fantastic. The voice was the same. So some context is Scorpius and Albus go into the bathroom and ask Moaning Myrtle some questions. And Moaning Myrtle is very, very helpful to Albus, but not at all helpful to Scorpius. She takes the same liking to Albus as she does Harry, because Albus is Harry's child, and it's so clever. It really was like a fantastic scene, because they like Moaning Myrtle was on this, like sing, obviously that's where she is, and it like moved, and she was like rolling over, like doing like gymnastics almost, and she would like spin around to like talk to Harry and kick Scorpius in the head with her feet accidentally. I mean, it was just so good, and she would just change in like a snap. She would be talking to Albus and going like, "Oh, you look just like your father," and then Scorpius would like ask a question, and he'd be like, "Quiet," So I loved that scene. It was so clever. Like I said, it was really well done. Everything was really blocked perfectly. The questions, the lines, everything was delivered very, very well. And I just was really, really enjoying that scene. So Moaning Myrtle is number 1 on the list. I think another one is Ron. Like I said, Ron fits into his role perfectly. He took over the joke shop after Fred, unfortunately, was not alive anymore, obviously, and George did not want to, so Ron took it up, and it's still thriving, it's still very successful, and I think he is very much like his character. He cracks jokes, he's kind of like he's kind of lounging, not really, nose to the grindstone kind of personality. He cares, and he really cares about Hermione and Harry and his friendship, and, when they're facing Voldemort, spoilers in the very end, it is a very, very Ron-like thing to do, because he, sits down and, kicks people out of chairs to sit down, so he sounds kind of mean, like what I'm describing it, but I thought the actor was fantastic for Ron, and I think it was a very, very good portrayal of the character. Ron is number 2, and number 3... This one I was thinking about, because I think Hermione, I did not get the sense that Hermione was Hermione. She's very sharp. She was very kind of abrupt. And Harry, the accent threw me off, because this is in New York. I mean, they're not British actors, so the accents were very, strange to me. Stephen Haggard, who played... Not Hagrid, Stephen Haggard, who played Harry, he did fantastic. I really enjoyed his performance, but his accent was something that I could change throughout the thing. So it was just inconsistent. I couldn't get around that. So that was one that I kind of could not see Harry very well. I'm trying to think of someone else. Who else did I think was very much like their character? I can't say Scorpius or Albus, because they weren't. Oh, of course, Ginny. Ginny, I thought, was exactly like she was in the books. She was yelling at Harry for doing all these things wrong, for making a mess, and then actually it was so the play was something like the screenplay. So if you get the screenplay and read it, Harry and Draco have a duel in Harry's house, and they have a duel, and Ginny leaves, and she comes back, and they're dueling, and they're on the ground, chairs are flying, and Ginny just goes, "I leave for 1 minute," and this is what I come back to. It was just so funny. It got a big laugh, and it was a very, very fitting scene. And I mean, the magic also in that scene was great. I will get into that later. But Ginny was also something that I thought was very much like her character in the book, because she was very just dismissive and you're doing this again, just stop. But she was also she cared a lot about Harry, which I think is a theme that I think sets them apart. Harry clearly cared about Albus, and Ron clearly cared about Hermione, and I think that's kind of the theme that carries over and really makes these characters seem like they were before, which I think is kind of how this whole thing comes to life. So those are really the people that I saw most of their characters. I'm sure I'm missing a couple, but there are a lot of them that were not in, the original series. So very difficult to really pick out all these characters, but those are the 3 people that I thought most fit their characters in both the play and the books. Okay, so now this is going to be a very exciting part of the episode, because now I want to talk about the magic of the Cursed Child on stage, how they did it, really how they managed everything. So right in intermission, I tried to put down as many, as absolutely the max amount of magical scenes that I could remember, and I will list them off and I'll really talk about some of my favorites for you. So here was the magic that I can remember. Well, I think it's just about all of it from the first act. So like I said, Harry and Draco had a duel. They also had a lot of spells, like I said, Ginny came in after their duel and, set the chairs back with Wingardium Leviosa, and there's also a lot of, Stupefy and all that stuff, and there's also some Avada Kedavras in there, so, and that's something I want to talk about a little more after this, because those are very well done. There's also the magical bookcase, which if you haven't seen, I'm sure like I said, there are links in the show notes for any video clips I can find, where the books really, talked and, went out of their shelves, and they also got, the actors got, sucked into the shelf. It was really, really cool. They also had a lot of flying sets. They had, the Trolley Witch. Not only was the Trolley Witch herself magical, but she had, her cart, and the cart would, fly off in the wind because they were on top of the train. And also, another thing I want to get into later is the Dementors. The Dementors were so scary. I think they were actors in there, and they were in these long cloaks and these long fingered gloves, and they had a black mesh, and it was silvery and blue, and there was flying, and they were so loud, and they would be gliding up and around. It was so cool. They also had the Time Turner. So like I was saying before, the whole premise of the book is Scorpius and Albus and Delphi have their Time Turner, and they go back in time. And when they do, that it starts to spin. They open a book, and it comes out, and it's floating. And also they levitated between their hands, which I still don't know how they did. And then they have they put their hands over it and everything, and it starts to spin. And then when they actually go back in time, there are these crazy lights. So I think I saw where they how they did it, and I think they used some kind of water contraption, because what they did was when they traveled back in time, all the lights would shut off, and then it would be they only all the stage lights, and then this contraption from the back would go on, and it would make the stage look like it was warping and shifting and going all these things, because it would the light was shining on specific places, and it would sway as one. It was the coolest thing. Again, I could not describe to you just how amazing it was, and all the clocks on the walls would be spinning so fast, and the moon cycle would be going back. It was the coolest thing. That was really one of my favorite parts. There are also a lot of things with Polyjuice. When they had to change into other people, when they went back in time and they had to change into their parents or something, they would have real sound effects and all these stuff. And then it was so cool because they had the actors, the first the Polyjuiced actors who were going to turn into some other people, kind of wearing their robe kind of not on their body. It looked like they were though, and they had their arms through. And then what they were doing is go the sound effects. They would pretend how be in pain, changing. They would kind of suck their arms in, and then the person they were changing into would put their arms out, because I think what they were doing was the person who was going to end up, the person who was taking the Polyjuice was kind of still leaning forward, and the person who was going to end up as that person was kind of crouched underneath the cloak. And when the person who took the Polyjuice kind of sucked their arms in, then the person who was crouched in the cloak would then put their arms out. And then the head, and then the arms would move with the actors lines, which was so funny. And then the head would go in, and then the other head would go out, and then the person who took the Polyjuice would run off stage in the dark. And I could not see it. I could not see a mistake with that, which I thought was so well done. That must have taken hours of practice. So they had Polyjuice, and they also had the Trolley Witch, which is so cool. They had this scene where they were on the train. It was the first time they were on the train, and Albus met Scorpius, and they wanted to leave to save Cedric. So they climbed out onto the roof, and it was that. I thought that was another thing that I didn't include that I just remembered actually, was what they did was they got on the roof, and then they were just standing on a case. So the way it worked, it was in this long line of people's trunks and cases acting as walls. And what happened was the lights went out, only focusing on Albus and Scorpius. All the other actors ran off, and then they climbed the wall, and then the lights went back on, and it turned into the roof, because they had this long line of trunks that acted as the roof, that I'm sure again I'll find a picture of, and they climbed onto it, and the lights would like slowly shine. It would look like it was like growing and growing, and then all the cases would appear, and then they would go on the roof, and then the trolley witch came onto the roof too to try to stop them, and there was like fire, and they were like little fire pockets, like fire jets or whatever in some of the cases, and the trolley witch would like, she grew like long talons, and she would like cast fire, and scorpions would be like falling off the train. So that was another thing that I thought was so good, so well done. They also had something that I was still puzzling through with a friend of mine that I went with. Was there was a scene that it was like when Harry's scar was starting to hurt again. I think it was maybe a Death Theater. Well, it was like a something like an evil, a person embodying evil. So there was a bed on stage. It was just a mattress. Then they took the sheet of a bed. They like threw it over it. And then Harry and Ginny got out of it, which was so cool. That one was like such a shock. I didn't expect, because I thought they were like making the bed for them to kind of cut them on, but it was a mattress in a frame. They threw the sheet over it, and then Harry and Ginny like got the sheet back over their heads, and I was so amazed by that. And that was, I mean, that's the last one I have on my list, but that one was by far, I think, the one that was the most shocking. I mean, just pure, like, you're watching it, like, not really knowing what's going on, and then like they're there. I think that was like the one that was like, at least in my opinion, the one that was the most magical, because you would see it and it would be so like mystifying. The sheets would, like, they would like start to move, and it'd be like so weird, like it was so confusing. But I haven't done any research. I don't want to get the answer just outright because it's part of the magic. But what I think happened was Harry and Ginny were in the bed, were in the mattress, and then when they threw it over, they would like open a little crevice because the sheet was covering it, so they could just like slice open the mattress for all we saw. It was definitely a trick that was shocking and amazing. But before we move on, I want to just touch on a couple that I was very, very interested by, and the two that I want to go with are the Avada Kedavra spells and the Dementors. The Avada Kedavra, I think there was one Avada Kedavra in this like outright we saw it. And I think there were a couple like shouted off stage, but there was definitely one that was Scorpius, and was this in the second act? No. This is definitely first act, where Delphi, spoiler alert, is evil. She went back time to like resurrect, like to like stop Voldemort from killing Harry, like try killing Harry, so he doesn't die, so the Dark Lord stays alive, all that stuff like that. So Delphi's evil. But also when she kind of like captures Scorpius and Albus, she puts them in these handcuffs. And then then they go on the Quidditch pitch. And a friend of theirs, well, not really a friend, but another Hogwarts student comes onto the pitch. And they're saying, go, run. Scorpius and Albus are trying to get him out of there. But not in time, because then Delphi casts Avada Kedavra, and he dies. No. But he doesn't, like, do it dramatic, like, and he, like, falls. It was so much better than that. What happened was, Delphi had her wand, she said Avada Kedavra and cast the spell, and from right where she was standing, from the angle, it looked like it was coming from her wand. A jet of green fire shot out, and it went right by him, and it looked like it hit the actor, and then in slow motion he fell. There are wires attached to him, so he could kind of like slowly go down, and then he hit it, and there was like a boom as they hit the ground, and then time sped up again. They were like, no. So that was so cool. That was one of the ones that I was really blown away by. That I was just so amazed by how well and how coordinated that must have taken. Fantastic. The spells were awesome. But now I'm going to talk about the Dementors. This was probably the scariest part of the whole thing. And I say that because there's so much involved with the whole thing, really. What they did was in this, so there were a couple Dementors when they were like trying to escape, like when Albus and I was gonna say Albus Severus, no, when Albus and Scorpius were trying to escape from the timeline they were in, Dementors found them, and it did not go well. So what happened was the Albus and Scorpius were running, and then they had to stop. And they looked around because they had traveled back in time to the fourth book to try to embarrass Cedric so he wouldn't compete in tasks, so he would be alive. And so we saw Dumbledore, actually. We saw Albus Dumbledore cast spells and like create, the courtyard and everything. So that was pretty cool. I thought that was very well done with Dumbledore. But then they came so Albus and Scorpius ran on stage and they were ambushed by the Dementors, and they came down, the lights, like every single light shut off, and then it like went all blue and like so that scene in The Crimes of Grindelwald when Leda was facing the Boggart in Defense Against the Dark Arts class with Dumbledore. That's exactly what it was like. All the lights shut off and it was just like a silent blue. There was no sound. And they were just kind of slowly falling down, two of them. And it was like slow motion. Albus and Scorpius were looking around. They couldn't say. They saw them. And they were going down. And the Dumbledores. The Dementors were kind of like floating in the air, like they were in water. And their cloaks were like billowing. And it was like they had I think the actors were in like full black bodysuits, so you couldn't see them. Then they were like draped in these like huge like robes and cloth and like mesh that would make them look so scary. And they would be like floating down, and then they would come on to Scorpius and Albus. They would find them, and then they would suck their soul out. They would then time would like in a snap speed up. There's no sound, and then it was like boom, and we could hear like the screeches of the Dementors, the music, and Albus and Scorpius were trying to run away, but the Dementors stopped them. They like smacked them or whatever happened, and then they smacked them. They said no, bop. But they sucked the soul. They were they fed on Albus and Scorpius. They didn't die, but that was so weird. And then the highlight of that whole scene. This is the very end of Act 1. The highlight of that whole scene was a Dementor came out into the audience. Now this one did not have an actor in it, but it was this really cool contraption that was like in the ceiling. It was a little section of the ceiling that like had like open, and then like a Dementor, like a cloth that came down that had like a dummy in it that looked like an actor, so it looked like a real Dementor. And I kid you not, I could have stood up in my seat and grabbed the Dementor. It flew right over. I could feel the gust of wind, and it was like the arms even moved. I think that was not, it was just the wind, but I think like the force of it moving. But it looked so real. And as the Dementor was in the crowd, we saw Dementors on stage. It was the coolest thing. The Dementor was like flying around and went up into the balcony and came like swooping down. It was like that scene in The Sorcerer's Stone when Quirrell was feeding on the unicorn, and Harry sees him, and then he gets the pain, and Firenze jumps over Harry and fights the cloak away, and then Quirrell like glides away like through the fog. That's exactly what it was, but it was so much creepier than that, and the Dementor looked different than that. It was like, oh my gosh, it was a heart stopping, but like not because you were like scared, but because it was just so amazing how they did it. Then it was like, oh my gosh. And the ending, the very end, was the Dementors like all like rose up into the air, and they were like they reached a crescendo, and they were screeching, and the music was swelling, and then just like that, boom, all the lights turned off, and it was complete darkness. You could not see your hand in front of your face. And then it turned back on, and it was intermission, and everything was gone. The Dementors were gone, Albus and Scorpius were gone, and the Dementor was gone from the crowd. It was absolutely astounding. That was just, and no one moved for a solid 3 or 4 seconds. The crowd was silent. It was intermission. The lights in the house were on, but no one moved an inch. And then finally, everyone kind of came out of their shock, stood up, and stretched their legs. And that's when I made my list of magic. That's when I put the Dementors down, and that was Act 1 of The Cursed Child. Oh man, that was a story. That was a journey. I was really hoping that we could get through both acts today, but alas, you could not. This is a part 2. So many reviews, so many part 2s coming your way. But I hope you enjoyed this. I certainly did. I was transported back. I will find as many clips as I can, as many images as I can, and put them in the show notes for you to enjoy. at your leisure. Obviously, you don't have to, but if you just enjoyed this episode, from me, I thank you for enjoying that. But also, you don't have to watch any of them, but it would definitely improve your experience, and it is a really lovely thing to watch. So if you're in New York by chance, if you happen to have the chance of seeing a Broadway show, see The Cursed Child. You will be thankful. It is now one act, so there was no two acts, random situation, but it was awesome. It was great. I loved it so much. And that really is my Act 1 spiel. But Act 2 is coming our way soon after next week. A solid month of reviews, but I am pleased. So that is this episode. Thank you so much for listening. If you want the pictures that I was talking about, go see at ThePotterDiscussion on Instagram. That is at ThePotterDiscussion. And if you're listening to this and you are not signed up for the Quill and Ink newsletter, you just missed it, because this week in March, I want to say March 4th, there is no, not March, May 4th, there is no Quill and Ink. Unfortunately, this Wednesday, there's no Quill and Ink, but next week there will be. So make sure you sign up for the Quill and Ink. When you do, you will get the ultimate guide to a perfect Harry Potter marathon for free, giving you 2 Easter eggs into every single movie to make your watching experience just that much better. In addition, you also receive emails every 2 weeks talking more in depth into your favorite Harry Potter topics. And that link will be in the show notes below. Make sure you sign up for that. For any questions, comments you have on the episode, you can send me a DM on Instagram. That is at ThePotterDiscussion. You can also send me an email. My email is ThePotterDiscussion@gmail.com. And I'm at ThePotterDiscussion on TikTok as well. I'm trying to post there now too. So go check all those out. Thank you for listening. And as always, remember that happiness can be found even in the darkest of times if one only remembers to turn on the light. I will see you later.
This was the Potter Discussion.